Alex Santos woke to the sound of their quarters door opening without authorization, which immediately triggered the combat-trained alertness that came from growing up on Earth, where threats could materialize from anywhere at any time. Their hand moved toward the emergency beacon before their brain caught up to process what they were actually seeing. Veka, they're the Raxian crewmate who normally maintained careful physical distance, entering their sleeping pod compartment with movements that looked both desperate and humiliated. The Raxians were graceful by nature, their bodies adapted to 6G desert worlds where precise movement was survival skill. Veka embodied that grace normally, but right now she moved like someone fighting coordination failures, like someone whose body wasn't responding correctly to commands. She looked at Alex with expression that managed to be simultaneously defiant and terrified, and her first words were blunt demand rather than request. "I'm freezing. Make room." Alex's confusion was immediate. The quarters didn't feel particularly cold. Maybe a bit chilly compared to normal, comfortable enough that Alex had just been sleeping under standard blankets without issue. Nothing that seemed like an emergency. Then Veka took another step closer, and Alex realized she was shaking, that her skin had taken on color variations that looked wrong, that her movements were clumsy in ways the Raxians never were. "The environmental systems," Alex said, understanding clicking into place. "They malfunctioned." 3 hours ago, Veka confirmed, and her voice carried shame that made Alex's chest tight. "Emergency protocols locked temperature at 15 degrees Celsius. For humans, this is uncomfortable. For the Raxians." She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought I could endure until repairs completed. I was wrong." Alex sat up, suddenly very aware that what felt like minor temperature drop to human biology was apparently approaching crisis for the Raxian physiology. "Why didn't you ask for help sooner?" "Pride," Veka said simply, and the single word carried weight of cultural values Alex was only beginning to understand. The Raxians value independence. Admitting I needed help felt like admitting inadequacy. She shivered violently. But survival instinct overrides pride eventually, and your body temperature is significantly higher than current ambient conditions. Alex made room in the sleeping pod, pushing back the standard-issue blankets. "Get in before you freeze to death, in what we'd consider sweater weather." Veka climbed in with movements that were clumsy in ways that made Alex's threat assessment instincts scream warnings about hypothermia severity. She pressed close immediately, seeking heat with desperation that overrode any concern about human social boundaries around physical contact. Her skin was cold. Wrong cold. The Raxians normally ran hot. Their baseline body temperature was around 42 degrees C when healthy. Veka's skin felt closer to room temperature, which meant her internal systems were failing to maintain the heat levels her biology required. "How bad is it?" Alex asked, wrapping thermal blankets around both of them while trying not to think too hard about the fact that their alien crewmate was currently using them as emergency heating equipment. "My body temperature has dropped to 34 degrees, Veka said, and the slight slur in her speech suggested hypothermia was affecting her cognitive function. "Another 2 degrees and I risk organ failure." The Raxian biology doesn't retain heat effectively. We evolved in environments where external heat was always abundant. Our bodies optimized for heat dissipation rather than conservation. Alex activated their communicator to check on repair status. Environmental systems were expected to be restored within 4 hours, which meant Alex was going to be a living space heater for the foreseeable future. "Okay," Alex said, adjusting their position to maximize contact area for heat transfer. 4 hours. We can do this. And for the record, asking for help isn't weakness. Pride almost killed you." "I'm aware," Veka said, pressing closer with zero regard for personal space norms. "But knowing intellectually that requesting assistance is rational doesn't make it feel less like failure when your entire culture has taught you that independence is virtue." Human culture does that too, Alex admitted. We're supposed to be self-sufficient, supposed to handle everything alone, supposed to never admit we're struggling. It's toxic as hell, but it's ingrained. Veka made a sound that might have been agreement or just acknowledgement. At least your toxic independence training happened on a world that made you resilient enough to survive your poor decisions. The Raxian pride combined with inadequate cold tolerance is potentially lethal combination. Yeah, well, Earth is classified as deathworld in most galactic databases, Alex said. Temperature extremes, atmospheric pressure variations, biological hazards. We evolved to survive conditions that most species consider lethal. Turns out that evolution produces humans who are walking furnaces by galactic standards. Uncomfortably warm furnaces normally, Veka corrected, and despite the hypothermia her voice carried the dry humor Alex had learned to appreciate. Your baseline body temperature feels cold to healthy Theraxians. I've described you as uncomfortably cool during previous interactions. But right now, your 37 degrees is significantly warmer than my 34, which makes you life-saving heat source rather than temperature discomfort. The hours that followed were uncomfortable in ways that expedition training definitely hadn't covered. Veka remained pressed close, her shivering gradually decreasing as Alex's body heat transferred through contact, but the intimacy of shared sleeping space remained awkward regardless of the pragmatic survival reasons. They talked to pass time and distract from the weirdness. Veka explaining the Raxian cultural frameworks around independence and vulnerability. Alex sharing stories about human societies that valued self-sufficiency to point of self-destruction. We're taught from childhood that needing help is weakness, Veka said, her voice clearer now that her body temperature was rising. That strong individuals endure alone, that requesting assistance admits inadequacy. I knew the cold was dangerous. I knew asking for help was rational response. But 3 hours of increasing hypothermia felt preferable to admitting I couldn't endure independently. That's incredibly stupid, Alex said gently. But I understand it. Humans do the same thing. We suffer alone because asking for help feels like failure even when refusing help is actually the greater failure. Your species has concerning relationship with vulnerability, Veka observed. Says the woman who nearly died of hypothermia rather than knock on a door and say, "I'm cold," Alex countered. Veka made that sound again that might have been laugh or just acknowledgement of fair point. Perhaps all intelligent species struggle with the gap between knowing intellectually that requesting assistance is rational and feeling emotionally that it's admission of weakness. Probably, Alex agreed. Though most species don't have Earth's lovely combination of toxic independence culture and deathworld evolution that makes us survive our stupid decisions more often than we deserve. Your planet sounds horrifying, Veka said. Temperature variations that would kill most species, predators that hunt in coordinated packs, atmospheric conditions that require constant biological adaptation. How did your civilization develop when your environment was actively trying to eliminate you? Spite mostly, Alex said, and the fact that constant environmental threats selected for extreme resilience. Humans generate heat constantly as byproduct of cellular processes optimized for surviving cold that could kill us. We regulate temperature internally rather than depending on external sources. We endure temperature ranges that most species find lethal. Alex paused. What you call room temperature, around 20 to 22 Celsius, is cold enough to cause the Raxians discomfort over extended periods, right? Mildly uncomfortable but tolerable for limited time, Veka confirmed, though we prefer environments closer to 30 or 35 degrees. And 15 degrees, the emergency protocol temperature that I find merely chilly, is genuinely life-threatening to your biology. Obviously, given that I'm currently using you as emergency heating equipment, and very grateful that deathworld evolution made humans into walking furnaces. Alex felt Veka's body temperature rising slowly, the cold-drawn feeling of her skin gradually warming toward her normal heat levels. The shivering had stopped, and her movements when she adjusted position were more coordinated. Hypothermia receding as human body heat did what the Raxian biology couldn't manage in cold environment. "I owe you my life," Veka said quietly, which is uncomfortable admission for someone whose culture values independence, but also undeniable fact. "Without your body heat, I would have continued deteriorating toward organ failure. Thank you for making room despite my terrible timing and awkward request phrasing. Anytime you're cold, you know where to find the walking space heater," Alex said. No judgment, no mockery, just heat transfer and probably some awkward conversation about xenophysiology. "Hopefully it won't be necessary again," Veka said. "But I appreciate knowing the option exists without facing condemnation for requiring assistance." The environmental systems restored after 4 hours, the temperature gradually climbing back to standard 22 degrees C. Veka didn't immediately leave the sleeping pod. She waited until her body temperature stabilized at healthy 42 degrees C, until she could move with her normal grace, until she was confident she wouldn't betray how close she'd come to hypothermia-induced collapse. When she did finally extract herself, her movements carried the careful dignity of someone who's deeply embarrassed but trying not to show it. "Thank you," she said formally, "for making room, for providing heat, for not mocking my weakness." "Needing help isn't weakness," Alex said, because the words needed saying even if Veka's posture suggested she'd heard enough vulnerability-positive speeches. "Pride almost killed you. Asking for assistance was actually the stronger choice, even if it didn't feel that way." Something in Veka's expression shifted. Not quite smile, but acknowledgement that maybe vulnerability wasn't as catastrophic as her pride had insisted it would be. Alex filed the incident report with Expedition Command later that day. Environmental malfunction created life-threatening conditions for the Raxian crew member. Emergency response involved using human body heat as thermal regulation resource. Incident highlights critical oversight in emergency protocols. Defaulting to human temperature tolerances as safe baseline doesn't account for species-specific needs. Recommend updating protocols to include species-appropriate temperature ranges and emergency response procedures. Also recommend adding emergency heat source to official human job descriptions, because apparently deathworld evolution makes us walking furnaces by galactic standards, and this is occasionally life-saving. Veka's supplementary report was more direct. Human crew member provided life-saving assistance when environmental failure created hypothermic conditions. Learned that pride is not adequate substitute for requesting help when survival requires it. Also learned that humans are disturbingly good at surviving conditions that would kill most species, and their body heat is both uncomfortable under normal circumstances and occasionally necessary under emergency conditions. Recommend environmental system redundancies and temperature monitoring that accounts for non-human crew physiologies. The incident became story shared among the expedition crew. The time environmental failure nearly killed someone because the emergency protocols assumed human tolerance was universal standard, and the awkward solution that involved the Raxian using a human as emergency heating equipment for 4 hours. Alex's friends back on Earth found it hilarious when explained. "You were literally a space heater for an alien who nearly died from what we'd consider sweater weather." But Alex remembered the desperation in Veka's voice when she demanded room in the sleeping pod, remembered the shame of admitting she couldn't endure alone, and recognized that sometimes being someone's source of warmth